Bridesmaids who were part of a Bridezilla wedding. What's the most memorable thing that happened? Story 1. I was a bridesmaid for my childhood best friend's wedding. She'd always dreamed of having a perfect fairy tale wedding. And at first, everything seemed fine. However, as the day drew closer, it became clear that she was becoming more and more obsessed with every little detail. If something wasn't exactly as she envisioned, it was a complete disaster in her eyes. She started making unreasonable demands, and I, along with the other bridesmaids, were constantly on edge. The most memorable moment happened a week before the wedding when she asked all of us to pay for a designer dress that was $600. We didn't have the budget for that, so a few of us politely declined and suggested less expensive options. She flipped out, accusing us of ruining her dream wedding, and even said she might not want us in her wedding if we weren't willing to spend that much. In the end, we all chipped in to make her happy, but I'll never forget how she treated us. On the wedding day, things only got worse. She was constantly yelling at the makeup artist, telling the photographer to take the perfect shot 12 times, and even snapped at the florist for not reading her mind about the bouquet's arrangement. It felt less like a celebration and more like an endurance test. By the time the reception rolled around, the stress was palpable, and it seemed like nobody was having fun except her. To this day, I wish I had just backed out of the whole thing. No amount of designer dresses or extravagant decorations were worth it. Story 2. My cousin's wedding was supposed to be a joyful occasion, but it quickly turned into a nightmare for all of us who were bridesmaids. The bride was an absolute perfectionist and became a total bridezilla in the months leading up to the event. The most memorable moment was when she called an emergency meeting with us the day before the wedding to review our duties one last time. Mind you, this was the third meeting she'd called in the last week. She went over every single detail with us down to the smallest, most ridiculous tasks, like making sure we stood at exactly 45-degree angles during the ceremony and how to hold our bouquets with grace while walking down the aisle. At one point, she had the audacity to ask one of us to lose weight before the wedding because the dresses will look better on you if you just lose a couple of pounds. She then told us that anyone who didn't follow her instructions would be fired from the wedding. I remember feeling physically and emotionally drained, especially when she started crying and shouting at one of the bridesmaids for showing up a few minutes late to a fitting. It honestly felt like we were her personal servants. The wedding itself was beautiful, but the way she treated us in the lead-up to it left a sour taste in my mouth. It was supposed to be about her love for her partner, but instead, it was about her need for control. Story 3. My friend was the bridesmaid in a wedding where the bride, let's just say, was more than a little demanding. This one particular incident stood out because it encapsulated everything wrong with her bridezilla behavior. A couple of days before the wedding, we were all staying in a large rented house. The bride insisted we all help decorate for the wedding, but she was very specific about the exact type of ribbon she wanted on the centerpieces. We had to go out and buy it ourselves. Mind you, it was an extremely rare and expensive ribbon that nobody could find in stores. After hours of searching, we found it, but when we returned, she didn't even say thank you. Instead, she pointed out that one of us had gotten the wrong shade of ivory for the flowers. It escalated to her throwing a tantrum and accusing us of ruining the whole wedding. The worst part? She didn't even apologize afterward. She just said, "Well, I'll be the one paying for it, so I guess I get to have it my way." We all walked on eggshells for the rest of the weekend, trying to avoid setting her off, and by the time the wedding was over, I felt like I needed a vacation from the whole thing. Story 4. I've never been to a wedding as chaotic as this one. I was the maid of honor for my close friend, who, to put it lightly, was a bridezilla. A day before the wedding, she had a meltdown because one of the bridesmaids accidentally spilled a drink on her wedding dress during the rehearsal dinner. Now, I understand being upset, but she completely lost it. She started crying hysterically, yelling at the bridesmaid for being irresponsible and claiming that the dress was ruined forever. What made it worse was that she didn't even give the bridesmaid a chance to apologize. She continued berating her for hours, making her feel like she was the worst person in the world. At one point, we had to physically remove the bridesmaid from the situation because the bride's shouting had gotten out of control. The wedding day itself was exhausting. She had a 10-page rules document that included everything from how we were supposed to stand during photos to what time we should be in position for the ceremony. She kept checking up on us constantly, making sure we didn't deviate from her plan. We were all terrified of disappointing her. And at the end of the night, when everyone was exhausted, she gave a speech thanking everyone for their sacrifices to make her perfect day come true. It felt more like we were being punished than helping a friend celebrate her marriage. Story 5. Being a bridesmaid at my friend's wedding was like stepping into a reality TV show. She had always been a little high maintenance, but nothing could have prepared me for her transformation into a bridezilla. The worst thing that happened was the day she decided that the bridesmaids should all get matching manicures and pedicures before the wedding. It seemed like a harmless request until she dropped the bombshell that we all had to pay for it ourselves, and if we didn't, we were ruining her big day. It wasn't just the cost of the manicures that bothered us. It was the fact that she treated us like we were her personal spa workers. She insisted we all get the exact same color of nail polish, and if anyone spoke up about not liking the color, she would give us a lecture on how it was her wedding, her rules. The true highlight, or lowlight of the day, came when she demanded we all get matching hairdos. Despite several of us having different hair textures, she insisted we all wear the same style. It ended up looking absolutely ridiculous, and we were all uncomfortable. The icing on the cake was when she spent most of the reception scolding us for not looking perfect in the photos. Needless to say, I don't think I'll ever agree to be a bridesmaid again unless I know the bride is not a bridezilla. Story 6. I thought I had seen it all when it came to weddings, but my experience as a bridesmaid for my cousin's big day definitely changed my perspective. It wasn't just the typical bridezilla behavior. It was the sheer unpredictability of everything. My cousin, who had always been a bit of a control freak, turned into a full-blown tyrant in the lead-up to the wedding. Her demands started small, like insisting on specific types of shoes for the bridesmaids, but they quickly escalated. About a month before the wedding, she called us all up for an emergency meeting. She went on and on about how we needed to look the best we've ever looked in our lives, and that we should all lose at least 5 pounds before the wedding day. She even started suggesting weight loss plans, most of which were completely unreasonable. She made sure to tell us, "This is my day, and I want everyone to look flawless. If you want to be in my wedding, you have to be at your best." Fast forward to the day of the wedding, and things only got worse. The morning of, the hairstylist she hired was late, and she lost it, screaming at her for ruining her dream day. As bridesmaids, we were expected to calm her down, but of course nothing we did worked. At one point, she demanded we all smile and laugh during photos, even when there was nothing to smile about. If anyone's face didn't match her ideal, we were immediately pulled aside and reprimanded. The worst part was when we were all standing for the ceremony, and she asked us to hold her veil in a certain way so it looked dramatic in photos. One of the bridesmaids couldn't hold the heavy veil properly, and it started dragging, and my cousin turned to her and whispered, "You're ruining everything. Fix it." It felt like a constant battle to meet her impossible standards. We all left the wedding with the same feeling, relieved it was over, but also deeply hurt by how she treated all of us, especially when it was supposed to be a celebration of love. Story 7. I've been a bridesmaid a few times, but I'll never forget the one time I was in a wedding where the bride was truly a bridezilla. She was a childhood friend, and we'd always been close, but leading up to her wedding, it became clear that something had changed. Her expectations were so extreme that it felt less like we were helping her celebrate and more like we were part of a performance she had choreographed. The first hint came when she sent out a 10-page wedding packet to all the bridesmaids about everything we needed to know. I thought, okay, no big deal. She's just organized. But when I read through it, it became clear this was a military operation, not a celebration. The instructions included things like, always keep your nails neat and chip-free, don't make any jokes that could ruin my photos, and at all times remain a few steps behind me for photos. Don't walk too far ahead of me, even if you have to wait. Then came the fitting. The dress was stunning but extremely uncomfortable, and the designer had made the dresses in sizes that were completely off. When one of the bridesmaids was struggling with her dress not fitting right, the bride snapped, "I told you to lose those last 5 pounds before the wedding. How hard is it to follow instructions?" We were all left in shock. On the day of the wedding, the bride was almost unrecognizable. She wasn't the person we had known. She was a shell of herself, completely consumed by the pressure of making everything perfect. During the reception, she started taking photos with us, but insisted that we smile even when our faces were clearly tired and ready to go home. I remember standing there, stiff as a board, trying not to show any signs of discomfort. By the end of the night, we were all so drained, and I could tell the other bridesmaids felt the same. She had completely turned what should have been a joyful celebration into a stressful, exhausting ordeal. Story 8. I was in a wedding where the bride's bridezilla behavior didn't just cause drama between the bridesmaids, it caused serious friction within the family. The bride, my aunt's daughter, was incredibly particular about everything, and nothing was ever good enough for her. The most memorable moment was when she had a meltdown during the rehearsal dinner. The bride's mother had been putting a lot of effort into decorating the venue for the rehearsal dinner, but when the bride arrived, she immediately began criticizing every single detail. The flowers were too pink, the seating arrangement was too messy, and the music wasn't quite what she had imagined. She started to get more and more upset, and soon enough, she was shouting at her mom saying, "You couldn't even get this right? Why did I even ask you for help? You're ruining everything." Her mom, completely defeated, apologized and tried to fix things, but the bride wouldn't let it go. She spent the rest of the evening nitpicking and creating tension between her and every single person in the room. The worst part? She ended up pulling the bridesmaids aside to tell us that we had to keep her mom in check during the rest of the wedding preparations because she couldn't trust her to get anything right. She also insisted that we not speak to the groom's family unless absolutely necessary, because they were just not on her level. The wedding itself was chaotic, filled with passive-aggressive comments and fights. The entire event felt so disconnected from what weddings should be about: love, joy, and unity. By the time the reception was over, we were all so exhausted that none of us had the energy to enjoy ourselves. It was one of the most exhausting and emotionally draining experiences of my life. Story 9. It was my best friend's wedding, and I was honored to be her maid of honor. But I quickly learned that being part of her bridal party would come with some unexpected challenges. The first few months before the wedding were relatively normal, but as the big day drew nearer, my friend turned into someone I didn't recognize. She became obsessed with everything being perfect. She asked us to help her with everything, from selecting a photographer to picking out the most specific types of lace for her wedding dress. It seemed like nothing was ever good enough for her. The most memorable moment happened on the morning of the wedding. The bride had asked me to be there early to help with last-minute touches, but when I arrived, she was already in a complete meltdown. She started yelling at me for not bringing the right color ribbon to tie the chairs in the ceremony area. I was confused because I hadn't been told about this beforehand. She demanded I fix it and screamed at me for ruining her wedding before it even started. I tried to remain calm, but it was hard. Every time I tried to apologize, she would escalate the situation even more. Later that afternoon, when we were getting ready for the ceremony, I made the mistake of telling her I felt overwhelmed by all the chaos. Her response was, "Well, this is your job. You're my maid of honor, and if you can't handle it, I'll find someone else who will." I was completely floored. I tried to stay professional, but honestly, the whole day felt like a pressure cooker. When the ceremony was finally over and the reception was underway, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. But even then, my best friend couldn't relax. She spent the entire evening nitpicking everything from the placement of the cake to the songs being played. By the end of the night, I was ready to crash and never hear the words "perfect wedding" again. Story 10. I've been a bridesmaid a few times, but nothing quite compared to the time I was in a wedding where the bride's bridezilla moments were truly outrageous. I knew from the start that the bride, my sister-in-law, was a bit high maintenance, but no one expected her to turn into an actual monster. A couple of weeks before the wedding, she insisted that we all attend a bridal boot camp to get into shape for the big day. It wasn't about fitness or health. It was about fitting into the dresses she picked out, which were extremely tight and uncomfortable. She hired a personal trainer and made us all sign up for intense workout sessions. If anyone dared to complain about not being able to make a session, she'd send passive-aggressive messages about how hard it was to have supportive bridesmaids. On the wedding day, the drama only escalated. The photographer arrived late, and she literally threatened to fire him. She began yelling at him about how he was wasting her time and ruining her photos. She then turned her anger on us, her bridesmaids, when she noticed we weren't following her perfectly planned schedule. We were supposed to walk down the aisle at exactly 2 p.m., and if anyone was even a minute late, she would give us the coldest stare imaginable. One bridesmaid, who was pregnant, had to take a break for some water, and my sister-in-law called her a drama queen for delaying the process. The rest of the day was a blur of stress. When we finally got to the reception, my sister-in-law demanded that we all stay in the background and don't steal the spotlight from the bride. The worst part was when she gave a speech during the reception, thanking us for being there, but only mentioning how we sacrificed our comfort for her dream wedding. None of us felt appreciated. We just felt used. Story 11. I was a bridesmaid for my older sister's wedding, and it was supposed to be a beautiful day. We had always been close, so I was honored when she asked me to be part of her big day. However, I soon found out that her idea of a perfect wedding wasn't going to leave much room for anyone else's feelings. The first red flag came a few months before the wedding when she sent out an email titled "Bridesmaid Rules." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a list of orders, detailing everything from the exact way we had to wear our hair to the acceptable conversations we could have in the bridal party. As the days passed, she became more obsessive. One day, while we were dress shopping, she informed us that we weren't allowed to wear any jewelry except for the ones she approved. The earrings I had been wearing for years were too tacky and didn't go with the theme of the wedding. To make matters worse, she demanded that I return the dress I had already bought for the wedding because it was too flashy and distracted from the color scheme. The most memorable incident happened at the wedding rehearsal. She flipped out over the smallest detail. One of the bridesmaids accidentally dropped her bouquet during the walkthrough. My sister's face turned bright red, and she started crying, yelling at all of us. "How could you be so careless? This is my wedding, my moment." Afterward, she refused to let anyone leave the rehearsal until we had practiced every single part of the ceremony 5 times. On the wedding day, she seemed to be fine until the ceremony began. At the last minute, she demanded the bridesmaids to walk down the aisle faster because the photographer was running out of good light. By the time it was over, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. The most frustrating part? She didn't even apologize for how she treated us. In her speech later that night, she thanked everyone for making her dream come true, but never acknowledged how she had torn us down in the process. Story 12. I had been looking forward to my best friend's wedding for months. We've been close since high school, and when she asked me to be her maid of honor, I felt honored. But soon, I started to realize that her dream wedding came with a hefty price, both literally and emotionally. From the start, everything was on her terms, and if we didn't meet her expectations, there was a problem. A week before the wedding, she started demanding that we all meet at a hotel for a pre-wedding retreat, where she wanted us to bond and do relaxation activities. What she really meant was that we had to spend the entire weekend running errands for her and dealing with her mood swings. On the first day, we spent 6 hours running around buying extra decorations because she decided she didn't like the ones she had chosen earlier. When we returned, she gave us a lecture about how disorganized we were and how this wedding was far too important to make mistakes. The breaking point came during the bridal shower. While everyone else was relaxed and enjoying themselves, she stood at the front of the room and began telling us all how disappointing the gifts were. She specifically called out one bridesmaid for giving her a less expensive gift than she expected, even though it was still generous. Then, in front of everyone, she demanded the bridesmaid go out and buy something else, something more fitting for her status. I remember feeling so uncomfortable and embarrassed. I tried to pull her aside and tell her that what she was doing was wrong, but she just brushed me off, saying, "If you can't handle being my maid of honor, I'll just find someone else." The wedding day was even worse. She made us all get ready at her house at 4 a.m. for the ceremony that didn't start until noon. By the time we got to the venue, the stress was unbearable, and all of us were so tired and irritable. Even the groom seemed on edge. The best part came after the wedding when she gave us a gift. A framed photo of us in our bridesmaid dresses, with a note that read, "Thanks for not ruining my perfect day." That was the last straw. I'm still friends with her, but our relationship has never been the same since that wedding. Story 13. I was a bridesmaid for a friend from college, and I'll never forget how much she changed in the months leading up to her wedding. She went from being laid back and carefree to becoming a full-on bridezilla. It started innocently enough with her asking for our help, organizing her bridal shower. But then it became clear that she was putting everything under an insane amount of pressure. The wedding invitations were the first sign. She was obsessed with making sure every detail was perfect, even though we all thought the invites looked fine. She insisted we all help handwrite every single address, which took hours. And then when she saw one tiny mistake, she demanded we redo the whole stack. It didn't matter that we were exhausted. She was convinced the perfect invites would make the wedding day more magical. As the big day neared, it got worse. She sent us an email with a what to expect guide, which basically included a long list of rules, from how we should dress to how we should behave around the guests. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone outside of the bridal party unless she gave us permission first. We were expected to follow her around and keep her calm, even though she was the one causing all the stress. The most ridiculous moment came when she insisted that we practice our walking down the aisle at least 10 times the day before the wedding. We had to be perfect. At one point, she started yelling at one of the bridesmaids for not holding her bouquet the right way. The poor girl was so upset, and the bride just kept saying, "This is my wedding. If you don't do things perfectly, you're ruining my big day." The rest of us just stood there, silently terrified. The wedding itself was a blur of perfectionist demands. She refused to let us sit down during the reception because the photos would look better if we were standing. There were moments where we just stood there, stiff and uncomfortable, pretending to smile. Afterward, she said, "Thanks for being my bridesmaids. Now I can't wait to do it all again next time." It was clear she wasn't thinking about the relationships around her, just the dream wedding. Story 14. I was asked to be a bridesmaid for my friend's wedding, and honestly, it was one of the most stressful experiences of my life. She had always been a bit picky, but I didn't know how far it would go until she started planning her wedding. Her obsession with perfection was all-consuming, and it was impossible to live up to her standards. One of the first signs that something was off was when she gave us a dress code for the bridal party. It wasn't just about the color or style of the dresses. It was about the fabric, the cut, and the exact shade of the fabric. If any of us deviated, she threatened to have us removed from the bridal party. It became an ongoing battle, with her sending us constant messages about whether our outfits were up to par. The day of the wedding, we were all expected to follow an extremely detailed schedule. She insisted that we arrive at the venue at 5 a.m. for hair and makeup, even though the wedding wasn't until 3 p.m. Every few minutes, she would come over to check on us and give instructions like, "Make sure your hair is perfect. No flyaways." Or, "Stand up straight. This is a formal occasion." She even reprimanded one of the bridesmaids for having too much fun while taking photos and told her she was ruining the mood. But the most intense moment came during the ceremony. As we were walking down the aisle, I accidentally tripped on my dress and stumbled. The bride, already standing at the altar, shot me a look of pure disdain and whispered, "You just ruined my entrance. How could you be so careless?" I was mortified. The rest of the ceremony went off without a hitch, but the tension was palpable. By the time the reception rolled around, we were all too tired to even enjoy the food or dancing. She spent most of the night worrying about how the cake looked, how the lighting was, and how people were looking at her. I left feeling like I had been part of a performance instead of a celebration. It's been years since that wedding, and I still don't think I could handle being in another bridal party unless I knew the bride wasn't a bridezilla. Story 15. I never thought I'd experience a bridezilla in real life. But when I was asked to be a bridesmaid for a distant cousin's wedding, I quickly learned the meaning of the term. My cousin had always been sweet, but as the wedding day approached, it became clear that her obsession with perfection was spiraling out of control. Her demands started with the dresses. She had very specific ideas on what she wanted us to wear, but it was almost impossible to find dresses in the right fabric, color, and cut. We spent hours searching, and when we finally found something, she claimed it wasn't quite right. She demanded that we all lose weight to fit into the dresses better. And when we couldn't meet her exact standards, she told us we would need to pay extra for custom fittings. On the wedding day, it only got worse. My cousin insisted we all get up at 4 a.m. for pre-wedding photos, and from the moment we started getting ready, she was directing us as though we were her puppets. She wouldn't let anyone leave the room without her approval, even if we needed to use the bathroom. She ordered us to smile constantly for photos. And when one bridesmaid accidentally let her facial expression drop for a split second, the bride snapped, "Don't you dare ruin my photos." When the ceremony started, she kept glaring at us from the altar if we didn't hold our positions perfectly. If one of us wasn't standing straight enough, she would scold us with a stare that made it impossible to concentrate. The most intense moment came after the ceremony when she announced that there were specific songs we needed to dance to at the reception. If we didn't follow her instructions, she said she'd be personally offended. I left that wedding feeling emotionally drained and wishing I had just stayed home. My cousin never once thanked us for all the work we did for her. Instead, she sent a text a few days later saying, "Thanks for making my wedding day flawless." The whole thing left a bitter taste in my mouth that hasn't gone away. Story 16. I never imagined I'd be a bridesmaid for a bridezilla, but that's exactly what happened when I was asked to stand up for my friend's wedding. She and I had been close for years, and I was genuinely excited when she asked me to be part of her special day. That excitement quickly turned into dread as the planning phase started. It wasn't so much the usual stress of wedding planning, but her need for perfection in every single detail. The first warning sign came when she handed me a bridesmaid binder about 2 months before the wedding. Inside was a strict schedule, detailing everything from how many steps we should take down the aisle to which specific songs we had to be dancing to. If anyone was even a second off, it would ruin the magic of her day. At first, I thought she was joking, but soon it became clear that this was serious. The wedding rehearsal was a nightmare. We spent over 4 hours just running through the ceremony, and if anyone made a mistake, even something as small as tripping slightly, she would scream at them. I remember one bridesmaid had a panic attack because she felt she was doing everything wrong, and the bride just snapped, "If you can't handle this, maybe you shouldn't be a bridesmaid." On the day of the wedding, she demanded we all arrive by 7 a.m. for hair and makeup, even though the ceremony wasn't until 2 p.m. We were all miserable by the time we arrived at the venue. She checked our dresses every 5 minutes to ensure they were perfectly pressed and scolded one of us for wearing the wrong shade of lipstick. The best part came at the reception when she suddenly insisted that the entire bridal party take part in a choreographed dance without any warning. We had no practice, and it was just awkward. By the time the wedding ended, I felt like I had been in a boot camp rather than a celebration. It wasn't about her and her partner anymore. It was about her controlling every single moment. I don't think I've ever been as exhausted after an event in my life. Story 17. I had no idea what I was getting into when I agreed to be a bridesmaid for my cousin's wedding. She had always been the life of the party, fun and carefree. But as her wedding approached, she slowly morphed into a different person. At first, it was the small requests, like making sure we all wore the same shade of nail polish and had our hair done a certain way. It wasn't that big of a deal, so I just went along with it. But then it got worse. One day, she sent us a group message demanding that all bridesmaids lose 10 pounds before the wedding. I thought it was a joke, but she followed it up with, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime day, and you need to look your best. We have to be photo-ready at all times." This wasn't even a conversation, it was a directive. She also insisted that we go to the gym together 3 times a week to stay in shape. When one of the bridesmaids expressed that she was already working out regularly, the bride dismissed her, saying, "I don't want any excuses." A week before the wedding, things took a turn for the worse. The bride started nitpicking about the details. Everything from the exact shade of white for the flowers to the type of tissue paper used for the gift bags. She demanded that we take a day off work to go with her to the venue for the final check, which turned into a 7-hour ordeal where we were yelled at every time something didn't meet her standards. She kept saying, "This is my dream and you're here to help make it perfect." The wedding day itself was a disaster. She had a no-tolerance policy for lateness. So when the florist arrived 5 minutes behind schedule, she screamed at the poor guy, causing a scene in front of everyone. The bridesmaids were all on edge, afraid that we might be the next to face her wrath. We weren't even allowed to eat during the reception unless she gave us permission to take a break. When we finally sat down for a moment, she came over and asked us, "Why are you sitting down when you could be mingling? You're ruining the vibe." By the end of the night, I was emotionally drained. It wasn't a celebration of love. It was an event where everyone had to conform to her exact wishes. I felt like I had spent the whole day walking on eggshells, and it was a relief when it was finally over. Story 18. I've been a bridesmaid for several weddings, but nothing prepared me for the bridezilla I encountered at my best friend's wedding. She and I had been through thick and thin together, so when she asked me to be her maid of honor, I thought it would be an amazing experience. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for me to realize that she had some very different expectations than I did. It started innocently enough. She sent us a mood board with ideas for the wedding, which seemed pretty standard. But then it escalated into a full-blown project. She insisted that every bridesmaid follow a strict fitness routine, even though some of us were perfectly happy with our bodies. She hired a trainer for us, and we were expected to send her daily progress reports. When one of the bridesmaids didn't lose as much weight as the bride expected, the bride made a passive-aggressive comment during a fitting, saying, "This dress is meant for someone who's put in more work than this." A few weeks before the wedding, she went on a rant about how we needed to be available for the entire weekend. She booked us into a hotel for 3 days, not to relax, but so we could help with last-minute things. We spent the entire time running errands, picking up supplies she had forgotten to order, and dealing with her mood swings. One day, we got a call from her telling us that the cake delivery was late and that we all needed to leave what we were doing to help manage the crisis. It felt like we were in some sort of wedding boot camp. The wedding itself was a blur of stress. She was late to every single photo session because she couldn't decide on which pose was perfect, and the photographer had to constantly redo shots. The most ridiculous moment came when the bride demanded that we all wear matching shoes. Shoes that were so painful none of us could walk properly. When I asked if I could swap to a more comfortable pair, she snapped, "If you're not willing to sacrifice a little discomfort for my day, maybe you shouldn't be in my wedding." By the end of the night, I was emotionally exhausted. I could barely remember the good moments because the whole day was spent worrying about whether the bride would approve of our every move. I didn't even want to talk to her afterward. Just trying to decompress from the stress was enough. Story 19. It was my cousin's wedding, and I thought it would be one of the happiest days of the year. She and I were very close growing up, and when she asked me to be a bridesmaid, I was honored. However, I quickly learned that her wedding vision didn't leave much room for others' needs. The first sign of trouble came when she started sending out wedding rules to the bridal party. She wasn't asking for our input. She was commanding us to follow her plan exactly. At first, I thought it was just the typical pre-wedding jitters, but soon I realized she was completely obsessed with control. She insisted that all the bridesmaids be on call 24/7 in the weeks leading up to the event. If she needed something, she expected us to drop everything and help. One of the bridesmaids had a work commitment and was told she would not be needed in the wedding if she didn't cancel her plans. It was absurd. The real nightmare began on the day of the wedding. We were all gathered at the venue at 8 a.m., getting ready for the 3 p.m. ceremony. The bride was so stressed out that she began snapping at everyone for the smallest of reasons. One of the bridesmaids was told to redo her makeup because it didn't match the bride's perfect image, and the bride even went so far as to accuse her of trying to upstage her. Things only got worse during the ceremony. The bride had us practice walking down the aisle 5 times in a row until everything was perfect. If we tripped or faltered even a little bit, she would yell, "Start over!" The wedding photos felt like a military drill rather than a celebration, and I could tell no one was having fun. The reception wasn't any better. She had a seating chart that was so rigid, even the groom's family was shocked by how little freedom we had. We were all told where to sit and when to stand. The most uncomfortable moment was when the bride demanded we all participate in a thank you speech to her guests, and the maid of honor had to give a speech about how the bride deserved everything she asked for. It was clear that it wasn't about love. It was about control. Story 20. I had always known my friend was a little picky, but I didn't realize just how much until I became a bridesmaid at her wedding. What started as an exciting opportunity quickly turned into a series of exhausting, stressful tasks. From the moment she started planning her wedding, she was obsessed with every detail. She gave us all a pre-wedding guide that included things like no texting during the ceremony, make sure your hair is styled exactly like the Pinterest photos, and don't speak to the guests unless they speak to you first. As the wedding day drew nearer, it got worse. The bride started demanding that we attend multiple pre-wedding events, from pre-ceremony breakfast to late-night decorating sessions. We were all expected to be available at a moment's notice, no matter how inconvenient it was. When one bridesmaid had to cancel an appointment for the dress fitting due to a work commitment, the bride accused her of not prioritizing the wedding. It felt like nothing was good enough. On the big day, she started nitpicking everything. During the hair and makeup process, she insisted on looking at every single one of our hairstyles before we were allowed to leave. If it wasn't exactly the way she envisioned, we were forced to redo it. Then, during the ceremony, she began criticizing the photographer's every move, saying the shots weren't worthy of a magazine cover. The reception was the final straw. She demanded that we all stay in the background and avoid any interaction with guests unless specifically asked. When one of the bridesmaids tried to mingle, the bride snapped, "You're here to serve, not to socialize." It was clear she had a vision of how things should go, and it had nothing to do with the joy of the occasion. By the end of the night, we were all ready to escape, but she kept saying, "Thank you for making my day perfect." It was anything but perfect. Story 21. I've been in a few weddings before, but nothing could have prepared me for the bridezilla I encountered when I was a bridesmaid for my childhood friend. At first, everything seemed normal, until she started sending out daily lists of what we should be doing, what we should wear, and how we should act. It was clear from the start that she was obsessed with control, but I never imagined it would reach the point it did. The first big sign came when we were picking out dresses. She had already picked a color, but insisted that we all find a dress in a specific material and exact cut, which was difficult to do since she didn't provide us with any fabric swatches or pictures to guide us. One bridesmaid had a difficult time finding the right style because of her body type, but the bride made her feel guilty for even asking for help, saying, "You're ruining the theme of the wedding." It felt like no one's individual preferences mattered. Only what the bride thought was perfect. The worst was yet to come. A week before the wedding, she started freaking out over the details. She demanded a group chat where she'd send hourly reminders about her expectations, from how we should walk down the aisle to the exact number of steps we needed to take. She wasn't asking, she was instructing. One of the bridesmaids had a small medical issue that delayed her arrival to the venue, and when she finally showed up, the bride completely ignored her, not even saying hello. Instead, she barked orders at her, telling her that she had ruined the schedule and had to make it up somehow. On the wedding day, it only got worse. She made us practice walking down the aisle at least 20 times because we weren't standing right. We were expected to follow a strict script, even when it came to when we should laugh or smile during photos. The photographer was snapping endless pictures, and if anyone wasn't looking perfect, the bride would stop everything and demand we redo the shot. At one point, I saw the photographer's frustration when he was asked for the third time to redo a shot that already looked fine. By the time the reception rolled around, I was so drained that I could barely muster up the energy to smile. I remember standing in the background, just waiting for the day to end, thinking to myself, is this what a wedding is supposed to feel like? The worst part was when, in her thank you speech, she singled out the bridal party and said, "Thank you for following my rules. Without you, this day wouldn't have been perfect." I couldn't help but wonder, did anyone actually enjoy this day besides her? Story 22. I agreed to be a bridesmaid for a close friend's wedding, and in hindsight, I wish I had never said yes. I had known the bride for years, and we had always been close, but as her wedding approached, I saw a side of her I'd never encountered. She became a total bridezilla. Her obsession with every little detail turned the entire process into an exhausting and painful experience. A few months before the wedding, she began sending us endless emails about the dress code. First, it was about the color of the dress. Then, it was about the exact fabric. She demanded that we all buy shoes that were chic and elegant, but not too expensive. So we had to scour bargain stores for the right pair. If anyone's shoes didn't meet her approval, we were immediately lectured about how everything has to be perfect. Things only got worse when she sent us a 12-page bridal survival guide, which was really just a list of her demands. She outlined every single thing we needed to do, from attending her pre-wedding yoga session to arriving 3 hours early on the wedding day, to make sure everything was running smoothly. No room for flexibility. It was as though we were part of a military operation, not helping a friend celebrate her marriage. The worst part was the wedding rehearsal. She yelled at the bridesmaids for not walking with enough grace during the practice, even though no one was supposed to be performing. I remember one bridesmaid stumbling slightly in her heels, and the bride threw a fit. She told her, "You can't be in my wedding if you can't walk in these shoes." On the wedding day, I had barely gotten enough sleep the night before because I had to stay up with her while she cried about every little thing that went wrong. By the time we got to the ceremony, everyone was on edge. During the procession, I accidentally got a little too close to the bride while walking down the aisle, and she shot me the nastiest look, as though I had committed some terrible sin. The entire event was more about her perfectionism than her actual love for the groom. I kept thinking, this is her wedding day. Why is she making us all miserable? The reception was the last straw. She made everyone dance a choreographed routine she had insisted on, and if we didn't perform it perfectly, she'd give us a disapproving look. I'll never forget the look on one of the bridesmaids' faces when the bride told her, "You messed up the step, do it again." By the end of the night, I was physically and emotionally exhausted, wondering if the bride even cared about how we felt at all. Story 23. It was a few years ago when I was asked to be a bridesmaid for my cousin's wedding, and I still haven't recovered from it. My cousin was never the most easygoing person, but I never expected her to turn into a full-on bridezilla. As the wedding day approached, I felt like I was walking on eggshells every time I interacted with her. The first sign of trouble came when she sent us a detailed spreadsheet about her wedding expectations. It included everything from how we should smile in photos to the order we should stand in during the ceremony. I remember feeling overwhelmed just reading it. We were required to be available for anything at any time, and if we didn't respond within an hour, she would send a follow-up message, demanding an immediate answer. The most outrageous request came when she insisted we all attend a bridesmaid boot camp to get in shape for the wedding. This wasn't about fitness. It was about making sure we all looked perfect for her big day. She hired a personal trainer to lead the sessions, and we were expected to check in with her every day to report our progress. If one of us didn't lose enough weight, she would text us saying, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Don't let yourself ruin it." Things went downhill fast during the wedding weekend. The night before the big day, the bride insisted we all stay at the venue. No one could leave. No one could take a nap, and we were expected to keep the energy high at all times. At 1 a.m., when most of us were clearly exhausted, she came into our room and said, "You need to look perfect for tomorrow. Get it together." It felt like a punishment more than anything else. On the actual day, she screamed at the florist because the flowers weren't exactly how she imagined them. She spent the entire morning making sure that everything was just right, down to the tiniest details. The most absurd moment came during the ceremony when one of the bridesmaids accidentally bumped into her while walking down the aisle. My cousin glared at her with such intensity that the entire room fell silent. The poor girl was visibly shaken. By the end of the night, when the wedding was finally over, I was so emotionally drained that I had no energy to enjoy the reception. The bride didn't seem to care about how anyone felt. She was only concerned with how things looked to others. The only time she acknowledged us was when she thanked us in her speech, saying, "You did great, even though I had to push you all to get things perfect." Honestly, I'll never look at wedding planning the same way again. Story 24. I had no idea what I was signing up for when I agreed to be a bridesmaid for my friend's wedding. At first, everything seemed fine. The bride was calm and things were moving smoothly. But the closer the wedding got, the more controlling she became. She started texting me every day, asking for the most minute details about the wedding plans. One morning, I received a text that simply said, "If you can't commit to being available for my wedding, then maybe you shouldn't be in the bridal party." The next couple of weeks were full of demands. She made it clear that if we weren't willing to give up everything to help her, we were out. She even told one of the bridesmaids that if she couldn't take time off work to attend a pre-wedding workout, she would ruin the look of the entire wedding. It felt like she was treating us like her personal servants rather than friends. Things took a turn when the wedding day arrived. We were supposed to be at the venue by 7 a.m., but one bridesmaid had to delay her arrival due to car trouble. The bride immediately snapped, saying, "We're not waiting for anyone who can't get their act together." She kept repeating that the entire wedding could be ruined by someone being late. Everyone was on edge, afraid to make a mistake. At the ceremony, she asked us to take photos a certain way, and if we didn't pose exactly how she wanted, she would yell at us to fix it. Afterwards, she insisted that we all smile and look excited during the reception, even when we were all exhausted. One of the bridesmaids tried to sit down for a moment, and the bride shot her a look that could freeze water. The worst part was when, at the end of the night, she gave each of us a framed photo with a note that read, "Thanks for following the rules. I couldn't have done this without you." It felt more like a performance than a celebration. I was relieved when it was over and swore I'd never agree to be in another wedding unless I knew for sure it wouldn't turn into a Bridezilla situation. Story 25. When I was asked to be a bridesmaid for my friend's wedding, I thought it would be a fun experience. She was one of my closest friends, and I couldn't wait to be part of her big day. What I didn't expect was the full-on Bridezilla transformation that happened as the wedding approached. It didn't take long before the fun turned into stress, and I found myself overwhelmed by her increasingly unreasonable demands. The first sign of trouble came when she sent out a bridesmaid survival kit, which included everything from color codes for our dresses to a daily checklist of tasks we were required to complete. She didn't leave room for discussion. If you didn't follow her plan to the letter, you were letting her down. She even told one bridesmaid she was being difficult when she asked for a different color of shoes because her feet hurt in the ones the bride picked. As the wedding day grew closer, the bride's demands became even more ridiculous. She insisted we all attend a pre-wedding relaxation session, which was really just her way of making sure we all looked picture-perfect for the big day. She hired a photographer to follow us around during these sessions, snapping endless pictures. But if we didn't look just right, she would make us redo the entire shoot. On the wedding day, things got worse. We were expected to follow her rigid schedule, and when anyone deviated from the plan, even by a few minutes, she would throw a tantrum. When one bridesmaid had to take a quick bathroom break before the ceremony, the bride gave her a lecture on how she was disrupting the flow. During the ceremony, we had to hold our bouquets in a very specific way, and if anyone forgot, the bride would glare at us as if we were ruining her entire day. The reception was just as bad. She demanded that we all stay close to her at all times so that we could be in the pictures with her. If we even slightly moved out of position, she would immediately pull us back in. It was clear that she wasn't concerned with enjoying the day. She just wanted everything to look perfect for the photos. At the end of the night, she gave us all a note thanking us for following her instructions. Honestly, it felt more like we were there to serve her than to celebrate her love with her fiancé.